You're listening to WASTOIDS.
Remix. Hey, hey. Woo.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of WASTOIDS with I am Jason Woodbury, and this week I am joined by Megaran, aka Raheem Jarbo, a former teacher and full-time rapper and podcaster and all-around pop culture cipher. Raheem stopped by to hang out with me at the WASTOIDS studio and talk a little bit about his latest album, his 11th, Live 95, a nostalgic throwback to the golden age of 90s era basketball and pop culture. He also stopped by the Out of Sight set to perform 3 tracks, which you can check out right now over on the WASTOIDS YouTube channel. All right, without further ado, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Megaran. Thanks for hanging out with us here on WASTOIDS. Raheem, a.k.a. Megaran, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and hang out here on WASTOIDS. Thanks for being here.
No problem, man. This is great. This is a long time coming, so I'm glad we were able to set it up.
Yeah, I know. Right when we first started WASTOIDS, you were one of the first people we reached out to. I'm so psyched that you're here to hang out, talk about your record, your new record.
Thank you.
Live 95, parentheses, Basketball Diaries. Were you a fan of the Basketball Diaries movie?
Yes.
Was that a reference point?
Oh my gosh, such a good movie. Very heart-wrenching. The intro is called the Basketball Diaries, but it's nowhere near as emotionally gripping as that movie was to me as a kid. Yeah, and that was a true story, right? Yeah, that's
that guy Jim Carroll. He made a couple really good punk records too.
Huh.
That I'm a huge fan of his. I think he's got a record called Catholic Boy that's really good.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, I'll send you a link afterwards.
I gotta look him up. That's awesome.
This is a really personal record, though. I feel like your stuff, you always reveal a lot about yourself in your work, but this one feels like it really has kind of like a specific rooting in your nostalgia for growing up in the 90s. Where did this sort of idea for the record come from? Where did it start?
It had always been in the back of my mind, and I think it was during the pandemic when I wasn't performing, we started doing online performances. Myself, Schaefer the Dark Lord, MC Lars, Frontal Lap, as a way to directly reach our fans that we couldn't, go out and play concerts for. So once a month, we started doing live shows on YouTube. And we got to March, and we're like, what's our theme for March? And the theme was St. Patrick's Day. And we're like, okay, we're not going to do what you think, where everyone's just rapping about St. Patrick's. But what about famous Patricks in history?
Sure.
And so we started brainstorming a bit. And Frontal Lot's Patrick Stewart. And I think Lars was Patrick Henry. And Schaefer is Neil Patrick Harris. And so that only left for me Patrick Ewing, the famous center for the New York Knicks. So I decided to build an entire show around the idea that if Patrick Ewing was tired of losing to Michael Jordan and decided to retire from basketball prematurely to chase a rap career.
Yeah.
So we built this entire skit around that. And in the process, I had to research 90s basketball, so I could get a lot of references correctly in my banter and things. And so I watched a lot of old tapes that I grew up watching. There was a video that we passed around the neighborhood called Come Fly With Me, Michael Jordan. There was one called the NBA Jam Session. And I watched those again. I was like, oh my gosh, basketball in the 90s was the best.
Right.
You had the Charlotte Hornets, you had the Orlando Magic, really cool uniforms and just outrageous characters and dunks. And so it really made me think back to the 90s basketball. And so it was that point where I decided I would give this a lot more of my time and effort.
Yeah.
And that was where the seed for Live 95 was planted.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I feel like obviously I'm notoriously not a big sports dude, so I'm always out of my element. But I mean, even I remember in the 90s the way basketball went from being like obviously a well-known sport. It wasn't like obscure pre-90s, but in the 90s, you really hit that like superstar era, I feel like, and it was really truly like a cultural moment where everything changed. I mean, so you watched a lot of games as a kid. You had like it was a part of your household growing up?
Oh, for sure. And it was a tough time because I was a 76ers fan growing up, and the 76ers have a great, rich, storied history, but they were terrible in the 90s.
Sure.
Like, they were just not a good team, to the point where Charles Barkley demanded a trade because this team sucked so much. He's like, I want to get out of there. So in 1992, he goes where? To Phoenix.
Right.
So Barkley's already my favorite player of all time, and I think just his path going from Philadelphia to Phoenix, kind of like me, is something that I draw a lot of inspiration from. And his story and his rise, like just for then to Phoenix and then the entire league to see how great he already was. You know, he went to the dream team that year and was like the best player there with Michael Jordan, with Larry Bird, with Magic Johnson, and then to lead the Suns to the finals. So it was like this great Cinderella story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a redemption for him. And I was just so happy. So like from then on in the 90s, the Suns became like my secondary team. I was like, all right, I'm going to root for these guys because they got my guy here, And so, yeah, it was definitely through a lot of the journey of Charles Barkley, I think is how I wound up coming to this conclusion of creating this album and this whole journey.
I think right before we started recording, we talked a little bit, and I mentioned to you that I recently got my own copy of Charles Barkley versus Godzilla, the
Classic.
comic book. That I remember that commercial being like the all-time coolest commercial I had ever seen.
Coolest thing ever.
I think later the Taco Bell dog also ran into Godzilla, but it was the new Godzilla, so it wasn't as cool.
Not as cool.
Not as cool as what Charles was up to. Another player who you reference on the record is Craig Hodges, who's a player I didn't know his story. I didn't know that there's pretty outspoken, interesting character. Can you tell me about him and how you found out about him and kind of got enmeshed in his lore?
Yeah, it's kind of a maybe an unsung hero of those early Bulls teams with Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen. He won a 3-point contest. Craig Hodges, great shooter. But also was very outspoken about social justice issues, and maybe was like the first Colin Kaepernick, type situation where he didn't necessarily sit out or protest, but he made sure to make his voice heard, and in what he thought was the most constructive way. And so when the Bulls won the championship, they went to the White House, and Craig Hodges arrived at the White House wearing a dashiki, African garb, and also with a handwritten list of grievances from maybe the African American community and from other disenfranchised folks, that from people he had met in his travels, like things that they would ask the president. And I was like, this is a true hero, a guy who would take an opportunity like this and not just kind of sit there, smiling at the camera, but use it to actually like maybe just poke a little bit at the system and maybe try to get some answers. And then in the true stuff of legend, the White House has a basketball court. And there's a story that Craig Hodges, after he spoke to the president, stepped out onto the basketball court and starts draining 3-point jumpers and his dashiki and all.
Yeah, that's
just
fantastic.
Hitting 3-point shots nonstop. And I'm like, what a legend. And this is a guy that unfortunately we don't hear about, because not long after that he was kind of blackballed from the league, because of his outspoken nature. So naming a song after him was very important for the record. And in it, I use a skit of him talking, and he recounts a conversation with Michael Jordan. Saying like, hey man, like you're the greatest, biggest star in the world. So before you go and sign that contract with Nike, think about what your power could hold. Like, what if we took you and went into the neighborhoods of Chicago, hired a lot of unemployed, black and brown folk, and created a workforce in this city, rather than sending your shoes overseas to get made for cents on the dollar. And Michael Jordan said, thanks, but no thanks. And he went off to Nike, and the rest was history. But just to think about the possibilities of that, and the fact that he was so forward thinking at that time, really makes him an unsung hero that I think more people need to look up and and learn about, for sure.
Yeah. Do you feel like, in terms of like your own work and your own willingness, because it's a song that in it you kind of articulate the tension that exists for a lot of entertainers, where they want to make people happy, they want to have fans, they want to interact, they want to bring the celebratory element of live music to people and to music to people, but they also want to maybe expand consciousness to some degree or try to affect change in some way. Yeah. But it's always like it's always like a tightrope walk, right? Because if you veer too far in one way, you risk losing your platform. Are there any, either artists or other players or anybody who, when you think about people who have like walked that line, that like come to mind to you as like standouts?
Yeah, for sure. I think LeBron James does a great job of using his platform. He's built a school in Akron where he grew up. Like, he's always outspoken about, social issues. I think the NBA in general has created a space for these players to be a lot more outspoken and to get their, grievances heard. Like, I remember them taking a game off when, someone was killed by the police,
right.
Things like that. So they're definitely listening to the players and the voices. And I appreciate that, People say, I don't want that with my sports. I don't need my politics with my sports.
Sure.
But unfortunately, it's real life, and these are real human beings, and they're affected by real things. There's a old saying. It's not that old saying, but a comedian said, "You go woke, you go broke."
Yeah.
And
sure.
And I'm sure a lot of people worry about that. Thinking this is why I think artists like myself, we're independent, so therefore I don't have to answer to any label. My boss is the fan.
Yeah.
And as long as I'm feeding and appropriately, engaging them in a way that they enjoy, it can't be taken away from me, which is
right.
a really, really fortunate spot to be in.
For sure.
But I understand I had to work very hard for that. It had to be 10 plus years of independent scraping and grinding. So a lot of people are scared of throwing that away.
Right.
So I do understand it, but I feel like at the end of the day, you're going to be remembered by not just the joy you brought to the world, but also, what you stood for.
Sure.
So I think it's important to let that be known.
On that topic of taking risks and venturing into like different territory for you, I really like Tractor Beam on the record, which is where you're in a different mode than we're used to hearing you, because you don't really rap on it. You're mostly singing on that one.
Oh man, Tractor Beam is a song I wrote like 3 years ago. And I never thought I would release it because I was so afraid. It's such a different song. It's me singing. It's a very dancey, upbeat tune.
Yeah.
But I let my friends hear it, and they were like, "This is great, man. Like, you got to put this out," And I think just after them convincing me for literally years, I decided to release it for this album. And I'm really proud of it, But it was very different, Like, I remember being afraid. My wife telling me, like, I don't know. This is very different for you. Like, I'm not sure. And I'm like, well, that's the point.
Right.
I think when you enter into a new album, a new mind state, you should be ready to go into some new territory. I think the worst thing, and maybe don't quote me on worst, but one of the worst things is when you finish an album from someone and you're like, okay, that was exactly what I expected.
Right. For sure.
All right. Now I'm going to go about my day. It was exactly what I got 2 years ago on the previous album.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. Now, that's not going to elicit any new response. It's not going to give you any new emotions, show a new side of yourself, or any growth.
Right.
So I think it's important to grow, and I think change and growth are supposed to be scary. And so when I got scared of that song, I kind of knew, like, maybe there's something to that. You got to be uncomfortable, I think, especially in this world of music coming out every 2 seconds,
Sure.
Like, you got to be okay with making yourself uncomfortable and trying something new. And that was what Tractor Beam was for me. I have a remix of it I'm working on that I'm like super stoked about.
Yeah, what direction is the remix going in?
Remix is live drumming, live instrumentation, and my boy K Murdoch did an excellent job with that. And it feels like funk soul.
Cool.
Cool. Yeah, I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. On the topic of 90s nostalgia, which we've touched on a little bit, so many of the things you're known for, obviously hip hop, huge moment in the 90s, where in the 80s it was, I guess technically the late 70s is about when it starts, right? Mm-hmm. The 80s is ascendant and it's becoming this huge phenomenon. By the time we get to the 90s, hip hop is just mainstream music. It is the chart topping, you know?
Yes.
You're also a huge wrestling fan.
Yeah.
You know, the 90s were huge for wrestling.
The Monday Night Wars.
I was definitely an NWA guy.
Okay.
The Wolfpack, the NWA
Wolfpack, yes.
Yeah, but I fell all the way off.
I would flip the channel back and forth like religiously, like USA, TNT. They're on commercial. Okay, flip back.
Yeah.
And all night long just to try to see what was happening. And I was in college at that time. And yeah, the Monday Night Wars were real for me. Like that was going to war. It was like choosing your allegiance. You know, it was just like, you know, we had the same thing in. It's weird. Everything became kind of territorial and in that way. It was Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis. It's like which set you claim? What side do you want?
Yeah, East Coast, West Coast.
East Coast rap, West Coast rap.
Yeah.
It was conscious rap, gangster rap.
Right.
It was like you just couldn't love both for some reason.
Yeah.
It was WWF or WCW, like which one, you know?
Right,
and
right.
for some reason, like everything became so territorial because there were always two great choices.
Yeah,
and so yeah, like that was definitely for me. Like I would certainly be into both, but I think I started off as a WCW guy. Growing up, you know, 80s was when, you know, wrestling started for me really.
Yeah.
NWA, early WWF, and so seeing a lot of those older guys go to WCW definitely made me NWO. Oh, there's Sting, there's Savage, there's Lex Luger. Like I know these guys, so
Right.
it really made me gravitate toward that. But WWF was building the next stars of the future.
Yeah.
You know, Stone Cold and The Rock and Mankind and Undertaker.
Whatever happened to The Rock? You don't hear anything about that guy anymore.
No, man, I don't know. Somebody should
Totally
do an
dropped
APB.
off. Yeah, I don't know.
I
Who
never
knows?
see him on social media, no movies. I don't know what he's doing.
With that said, so like 90s is a huge thing right now. 90s nostalgia's back. Are there any things from the 90s that you hope don't come back into fashion?
Yeah, I would say the not so subtle like racism of so many of my favorite like movies.
Oh, that's a real solid point.
The terrible humor in race and ableist jokes and like so many things that you see in all of my favorite 80s and 90s movies, TV shows. You know, it's like, all right, they gotta have the fat guy to make fun of. All right, they gotta have the Asian guy to make fun of. They gotta have the Indian guy to make fun of. Like it was just really rampant at that time. You know, so I definitely don't need those things to come back.
Sure.
Sorry to get it all heavy.
No, it's okay. I thought you might say something like Jinkos or something.
You know, but no, I actually like Jinkos though. I got a few pairs, so I keep them
That's
for
cool.
when I go to the gathering of the Juggalos.
Amazing.
But yeah, I think retro fashion. I mean, except maybe the big hair. Like I wasn't necessarily a big fan of big hair, but I do. Like I love the colors. I love so much of that stuff. The pastels, that have come back into society. Like I think that's great.
Yeah.
You know, for sure. I think the music was really cool. Like we just hit a creative boom at that time. You know, and sometimes you can look back and be like, all right, well maybe that wasn't that great. It was just I was caught in that moment.
Of course.
You know,
of course.
Like, there's two things that people say about nostalgia. Nostalgia is undefeated, and nostalgia just proves that how bad your taste was at that time. So,
Sure.
So yeah, when you're stuck on something, it's like, oh, you just had really, really bad taste, you know. But
yeah.
But I love the '90s for sure, and it brings back good feelings, and that's really where I kind of found my footing in music, was just creating good feelings, like finding those good, happy moments, you know. And so it was first through video games, comic books, anime, cartoons, you know, and then through sports. You know, and I was really worried about alienating a lot of my fan base, being like, I'm going to make an album about basketball. And a lot of my fans are like, I'm not into basketball. And I'm like, well, do you remember NBA Jam? And
yeah.
I'm like, oh, heck yeah, I do. You know, do you remember those cool Charlotte Hornets colors and, you know, things like that? So there were so many great cultural moments that came out of the 90s NBA boom that people certainly remember and have fond memories for.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thanks so much for hanging out, for chopping it up with us.
No problem.
I think we're gonna get some. We're gonna do a performance now. So
we are. I have some good news though. I want to share.
No, please.
So the Live 95 album came out in October. Super proud of that. It placed on Billboard. That's some cool things. So I have been working on a B-side to the Live 95 experience, which will be called Overtime, which is coming this summer to a music distributor near you. So it's going to be a lot of new songs, a lot of remixes of the old songs. We have a Craig Hodges remix, we have a Tractor Beam remix, and a few others, as well as some brand new tracks. So I'm super excited about bringing this to you.
Well, excellent. Well, we'll look forward to hearing that. And thanks for hanging out on Wastoids. And
No problem.
Let's get this performance going. Thanks so much, Megaran.
Yeah, thank you, man.